Okay, we're back for the actual guided practice for today. So this is the sheet that you should have had printed off that you can do this work with me. This is one we're going to complete this all together. It's going to be identical to the ones that you do for homework, but you know the drill. It's going to be different problems, but you're going to want to have this sheet filled out so you can refer back to it if you have questions during the homework, okay? So the basic idea is this. There are several sections to each of these boxes where you're going to use your skills of changing fractions to decimals and also adding the new component of number lines to this based on what we did in our number talk this morning. So every section is basically going to have 1, 2, 3 parts on the left. So written name, the decimal for the name of the number, and the hundreds grid that you're going to color in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts to every one of the boxes you're going to be doing. These 2 parts over here is what does the fraction look like, and where does that fraction and decimal live on the number line. So again, every box that you're going to do in the practice and every box you're going to do in the homework is going to have 5 parts: written name, decimal, number grid, fraction, number line, and that's going to be kind of your strategy to get through it. So if you look at this one, this is the first one that they did for you that's kind of completed as a model. So in words, the decimal is 2/10. Well, it's tenths, so I know there's one number after the decimal, so I write that as 0.2. Again, the question comes up, do I have to put the 0 in front of the decimal point? My answer is no, you do not, but what they're going to be showing you all the time is that there's really 0 whole numbers, just to know that you're working with decimals. So whether you put the 0 in front of the decimal or not, that's your choice. I probably leave it off almost all the time, okay? So 2/10 in words, 2/10 in decimals. What does 2/10 look like on our grid? Well, every one of these columns is a 10. So there's 1/10, 2/10. And even though they're broken out into the hundreds, you guys already know that 2/10 is the same thing as 20 hundredths on a hundreds grid. But to show 2/10, you just color in 2 of those columns, right? Fraction-wise, 2/10 as a decimal is 2/10 as your fraction. And then the new piece that we learned in the number talk today, if I have my number line that goes from 0 to 1, I'm living in between one whole number here, I can break each of these parts out in between 0 and 1 into a tenth. So if I wanted to, and this isn't bad practice, you could actually label the rest of these tenths in here, just to kind of get you practicing on what does it look like in between my number line, between whole numbers. So 2/10 on my number line, if this one is 1/10, the next one is going to be 2/10, and that's where you put your dot. So this is going to be your example for 2/10, all right? What we're going to do, there's one more example on the front here, and there's 2 on the back that we're going to do together to kind of help you with your homework for tonight, okay? So if I look at our next example here, 25 hundredths. Well, as a decimal, they did it already. So some of these things are going to have parts already done, and you're going to have to finish the parts that are missing, all right? So 25 hundredths looks like 0.25. I'm going to draw that on my number grid, 25 hundredths. So there's going to be 10, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 25. And I mean, you don't have to go in and color these exactly, but just so you know what you're looking at. Like my purple pen. Yes, I know we don't do math in pen, but I think the purple shows up a little better than pencil. And I miss purple, so we're using purple pen today. All right, 0.25 as a decimal. Well, look at the name. It's 25 hundredths. There's 2 numbers after the decimal, so we know that's going to be 100 in my denominator. And how many hundredths do I have? I have 25 of them. So my fraction is 25 hundredths. Now, as opposed to this number line that went from 0 to 1, this one, since I'm dealing with hundredths, is going to go from 0 to what? 0, 1/10, 2/10, 25 hundredths lives in between 0.2 and 0.3, because if I actually convert these over and start looking at them as like hundredths, 2/10 is the same thing as 20 hundredths. 3/10 is the same thing as 30 hundredths. And if you ask yourself, if I had 25 hundredths, where do they live in between? Well, 25 is in between 20 and 30. So kind of like right in the middle there is where my 25 hundredths is going to live, Okay, so even though this is still between 0 and 1 and I'm breaking it into tenths, remember on our number talk that we did a little bit earlier? So here's my whole number line. And remember, if I break between 0 and 1, I can break it into tenths. So this whole number line right here lives in between here. But remember, if I'm breaking it into hundredths, between 0 and a tenth on that one, that is actually one little part that lives in here. So that's kind of how that one works. All right. Now remember, if you're not sure, you've got this sheet to help you when you work on the worksheet for tonight, okay? Okay, on to the back. Now you'll see on this one, there's a lot of things that are missing. It doesn't give us the decimal, it's not colored in, it doesn't give us the fraction, and it doesn't give us any help on the number line at all. But what it does give us is the name. So I need 62 hundredths. So how do I write 62 hundredths as a decimal? Well, hundredths means there's two numbers after the decimal, so it's 0.62. Now, you can finish the rest however you want to. If I did the decimal, then it makes sense to me just to go ahead and do the fraction. It's 62 hundredths, 62 over 100, okay? Now, how many of these individual boxes on the 100 grid am I going to color in if I have 62 of them? The answer is 62. So here's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 2. Again, once you kind of go through, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time coloring them all in, but just so you know which ones are colored and which ones are not. So there's like a clear color difference, okay? Now, 62 hundredths. Now, again, I'm going into my number line here. It's between 0 and 1, and we know that each of these is a tenth. So there's 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, and then 10 tenths is really one whole, right? So that's why it says 1 there. Now, you're asking, well, where does 62 live? Well, what might be the next easiest thing to kind of think about is changing your tenths into hundredths and then throwing those up here. So I've got 1 tenth, that's really 10 hundredths. 2 tenths is 20 hundredths. Now, does 62 hundredths live between 10 and 20? No. Let's keep going. 3 tenths is 30 hundredths. 4 tenths is 40 hundredths. Does 62 live in between 30 and 40? No, I gotta keep going. So 50 hundredths, 60 hundredths. Oh, my brain's starting to connect here. All right, 62 hundredths. Oh, I said 60 hundredths. But does 62 live in between 50 and 60? Do I say 50, 51, 52, 62? No, 62 doesn't live there, so I gotta keep going a little bit more. So 7 tenths is 70 hundredths, and I'm just going to finish this. 8 tenths is 80 hundredths, 90 hundredths, and then we've got 100 hundredths, which is one whole, right? So that gets us through there. So if I have 62 hundredths, where's 62 going to live? Well, it's not between 50 and 60. 62 is between 60 and 70. Now, the one thing you're going to have to ask yourself is 62, is it going to live like right over here, right next door to 70? Well, half of that, halfway in between here is 65, right? So 62's got to be on this side of halfway through it, and 62 is going to be pretty close to the 6. So what I would probably do is just mark my spot right there. That looks like that. Some of you might say, well, that looks like it's 63 and not 62. Believe me, as long as you can show me that 62 is less than halfway through and it's closer to the 6 than it is to the 7, I'm not going to get out a ruler and start measuring that you got it exactly right. That visually is good enough for me, okay? All right, last one. You're like, wait, where's the number? Well, you're going to kind of have to figure out the number, and you're actually going to do a couple of these on your homework for tonight. So there's no number here, there's no decimal, there's nothing on the 100 grid, there's no fraction, but what they did is they buried the number on the number line, and you got to figure out what that number is to do the rest of it. So here's what I would do. Go back in, do all of your decimals on the number line. So 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, and then 10. Now, when I look at this, that black dot doesn't live on any of my tenths. So that tells me it's in between two different tenths numbers. So that means I'm dealing with hundredths, right? If I was lucky and I had that right there and it lived right on that, well, that's 4 tenths. It's right on the 4, right? Or if I had this one and it lived right there. That's 1/10. But when they start putting decimal points in between 2/10, you know you're dealing with hundreds because they're breaking those tenths down even more. So if I look at their number here, it's in between 7/10 and 8/10. Now you already know this, that 7/10 is 70 hundredths, 8/10 is 80 hundredths, right? So look at the dot. What's halfway in between 70 and 80? Well, hopefully you're shouting out at me, Mr. S, it's 75 hundredths. And you're right, so there's 75. This dot is bigger than 75. So again, you can play with this one. I would call this one, I'm gonna let you think, what would you call it? I would call this one 78 hundredths, okay? If you said 77, if you said 79, perfect. And that, just go with that for your answer, right? So, but I'm gonna call this one 78 hundredths. So I'm gonna write this out in words. Now, you know how I am. If you did not put a hyphen in here, in between your tens and your ones when you're writing out a number, shame, shame, shame. You forgot our lifelong lesson that we worked on this year. So this is 78, and it's not tenths, it's hundredths with that THS on the end, right? So how do I take 78 hundredths and write it as a decimal? Hundredths has two numbers after the decimal, so it's 0.78. How is 78 hundredths written as a fraction? Well, if you just say the number, you've got the fraction, 78 hundredths, right? And then the last thing you got to do, because they already did it on the number line for us, is color it in. So what does 78 hundredths look like on a 100 chart? 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and then 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is going to stop right there. And then I'll go in and kind of just roughly color all these guys in because I don't want to waste all my purple ink. And there you got it. So that's basically what you're going to be doing on tonight's homework. Remember, 5 parts: written, decimal, fraction, number grid, number line. 5 parts. Sometimes they'll give you some of it. Sometimes you'll have to write more than others, but it's all kind of what you're going to do. Now, when you print off the homework for tonight, what I did is just kind of help you out. There's one that is it has all 5 parts done for you. So it's got the name, decimal, fraction, number grid, and number line right here. Any part that's missing, what I did is I went and I highlighted it in yellow. So if you printed this off in color, you're going to see some of these parts have some yellow on them. If you didn't print them off in color, that's okay. You'll see that these are kind of grayish. Those are where you're going to write your answers, right? So like on this first one, you see I've got the name, I've got the decimal, I don't have the fraction, it's yellow. I don't have the number grid, it's yellow. And you can see that it's right here on the number line. Okay. Oops, no back. All right, the next page again, here's the name, 9/10. What's that look like as a decimal, as a fraction? What's it look like on your 100 grid? And where would 9/10 be on this number line? So again, what I would do, just make sure you mark all of your spots in here as far as what all these tenths are, and that's gonna be really helpful. Okay, next problem, 54 hundredths. What's it look like as a decimal, as a fraction? What's it look like on the number grid? Where would 54 hundredths be on the number line? So fill out the number line, and you know you're talking 54 hundredths, so it's not gonna live on one of these tenths, it's gonna be in between. So where would that be on that number line, okay? Now, this last page, this is my fun page for you, all right? This is like the last one that we did. I hid on each of the number lines a dot. You need to figure out what is that dot and do name, decimal, fraction, and number grid, okay? So figure out what is the name of that dot. Where does he live? Well, it's in between 1/10 and 2/10. So I know I'm dealing with hundredths. So how many hundredths is that? And fill out that section. And then this last one, I made it super simple for you. I put it right on a tenth. So what tenth is that? Yellow, 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 yellow. 4 parts that you have to answer there, okay? Now, I know this video was a little bit longer than normal, but I wanted to work through those samples together and kind of go over the homework with you. So hopefully, if you're not quite sure what you need to do, you can throw this video back in reverse and watch it again. and kind of go from there. But I think if you kind of just give it your all, you use the practice sheet that we did together during guided practice today, I think you'll be able to do great on this because you guys are doing great work with your fractions and decimals. So all we're doing today is just throw on that new number line component to it. All right. So if you do have questions, email me, put it in a comment in Google Classroom, but I think you got this. So have fun, and I will talk to you tomorrow.